Set for release in November this year, the upcoming novel Halo: Edge of Dawn by Kelly Gay seems poised to return us to the events of Zeta Halo. Yet, Infinite's campaign is not the only place where the conflict that engulfed this particular Halo ring has been explored. So, in anticipation of this continuation, regardless of how you feel about the format, I thought it was finally time to make a timeline video regarding the events of the game, from the Infinity's fall to the Master Chief's latest victory. After a year of the Creator's reign, the UNSC had finally found a way to win, a desperate plan to destroy Cortana, but a plan nonetheless. However, after Doizak was destroyed at Cortana's command, Atriox and the Banished sought a way to crush the Created themselves. As a result of various factors, all three factions were drawn to Zeta Halo. With Cortana already attempting to seize control of the ring from its monitor, 117649 Despondent Pyre, the Banished were the first of her opponents to arrive, and preemptively set up a force ready to ambush the Infinity after learning of its location from a captured Oni agent. Although the degree to this was unknown, the Banished also encountered created opposition on the Halo ring. December 12th, 2559. Upon the arrival of the UNSC Infinity and its battle group, the Banished rapidly ambushed them, crippling the frigates sent ahead and outright ramming the Infinity itself while Atriox led boarding parties. According to the Banished War Chief Escharum when recounting the event, the Infinity lasted only 4 minutes against the Banished ambush, with a minimum of 4 to 8 dreadnoughts being present within range of the Halo ring at the time. Despite how soon the ship lost the fight, the Infinity was seemingly able to cripple at least one of the Banished dreadnoughts. Early into the space battle, Captain Lasky and the Master Chief oversaw the deployment of the weapon against Cortana, before moving to escape the ship. Splitting up shortly after rescuing Spartan Fireteam Taurus at one of the hangar bays, where the Chief moved to hold off a large group of incoming Banished forces. At this point, Atriox made his entrance, and after a brief but fierce fight, he overpowered the legendary Spartan and threw him out into the chaos of the space battle. Meanwhile, the other Spartans were able to get Lasky to a Pelican to escape the doomed ship. However, while giving orders to evacuate and regroup on Zeta Halo, Lasky's communications were cut off in static, which left his status afterwards unknown, with the same being the case for other significant figures on the Infinity. Along with this, only 3 of the human ships present at the ambush were able to be accounted for during the wider conflict, with the Mortal Reverie and another frigate crashing onto the surface, while a third remained drifting in the debris field. However, the state of the Infinity itself after the initial space battle ended was unknown to both factions. Throughout the ship, Spartans, often separated from their usual teams, were active in the defence before Lasky gave the general evacuation order and played a key role in getting other personnel out of the ship, whether by providing cover and fighting off boarding parties, or literally holding the ship together to keep routes to escape craft open. Led by Spartan Makovich, Fireteam Windfall fought off various Banished fighters and dropships with sabres in Infinity's defence, before moving to provide cover and coordination for human craft escaping to the ring, a combination of Bumblebee escape pods, ODST drop pods, and Pelican dropships. During this effort, Makovich's sabre was targeted by several Banished fighters and presumably shot down to crash onto the ring. However, many of the hundreds of ships escaping the Infinity were destroyed on their way to the ring, sometimes mere seconds after leaving the ship. Without skipping a beat, the various Spartan teams that made it to the surface would begin moving against the Banished forces and regrouping the survivors from Infinity. Fireteam Intrepid found themselves in the middle of Banished forces from the second their drop pods hit the ground, separated from the front lines of the fighting. Noticing that the Banished had set up a series of turret emplacements set to pick enemy craft out of the sky as they tried to land, Spartan Griffin directed his fireteam in taking down the positions. Further up, Spartan Kovan from Fireteam Shadow made her entrance to the surface of the ring in dramatic fashion, deliberately lining up her drop pod with a Banished Phantom, crashing straight through it, clearing out the Banished within, then swiftly moving to rescue a group of survivors and provide sniper cover for Fireteam Taurus. After the fact, the weapon would note that this area saw some of the heaviest fighting in the first and second days of the battle. Spartans such as Stone and Sorel, meanwhile, focused on protecting the regular soldiers and civilian crew members that they had landed with, while acting as mobile rally points for other groups of survivors. December 13th, 2559. On the Banished side of the battle, Aatrox moved to confront Cortana personally, referring to her as a failed god and mocking her with his defeat of Master Chief. During this time, he also discovered more about the Endless and sought a way to reawaken them. With no other way to stop the Banished, Cortana salvaged the weapon created to contain her, deactivated its deletion protocols, and moved it to a Forerunner storage facility close to the Silent Auditorium in the hopes that Chief would be able to recover it. Then she returned to Aatrox, and with what little controls she still had, triggered something to fracture the Halo ring across at least dozens, or even hundreds of miles in all directions from the Silent Auditorium and for its entire diameter. Simultaneously through Cortana's command, the Halo ring initiated a random jump into slipspace that sent it, and most of the ships and debris from the space vessel to an unknown region of the galaxy. Despite Cortana's intentions of hindering the Banished, the destruction hit both sides equally, destroying Banished fortifications while leaving some human forces with nowhere to go other than following the avalanches of devastation. At this point of the battle, Fireteam Taurus and Kovan had taken down two of the Banished turret emplacements, with Fireteam Intrepid approaching the same position from the east. Elsewhere, Spartan Stone was forced to pull one of the Infinity's escape pods out of a fracture in the ring's surface to save a group of survivors inside, before swiftly moving to aid another group whose craft had been thrown across the ring in the process. December 15th, 2559. In the days following the devastation of the ring, the human survivors were scattered and at constant threat from Banished patrols until Spartan Makovich located the largely intact remains of the frigate Mortal Reverie and coordinated with Spartan Griffin and Fireteam Taurus to set it as a rally point for as many survivors as possible, with Griffin becoming one of the leaders of the group alongside Marine Commander Hensler. However, many of those that would make it to the ship would be non-combatant crew members from the Infinity. One such group was known as the Boat Crew, who, en route to the site led by Spartan Kovan and Stone, suffered at least 2 ambushes by the Banished over the course of their almost week-long journey, which left Lieutenant T.J. Murphy, a Requiem campaign veteran, as the only one in the group that had combat experience aside from the Spartans. Aside from this location towards the north end of the main ring fragment, the only long-term human presence on the fragment was a series of base platforms scattered across it. December 18th, 2559. Towards the south areas of the main fragments, small groups of cut-off Banished survivors had walked around aimlessly for days, trying to re-establish contact with Banished leadership and hunting the wildlife still present on the ring. After following one of these groups to a crossing point between two areas of the fragments, Spartan Horvath witnessed a pair of brutes arrive close by and order a base drop to cut off any human survivors trapped east of the position, with this point later becoming known as Riven Gate. While observing this, Horvath was spotted and forced to flee from nearby phantoms. In the ensuing chase, the Phantom was able to destroy the already weakened supports that connected to different parts of the fragment, which was enough to flip it upside down, and left Horvath buried under rubble on what he would later discover was a fragment that would fully deteriorate several days later. While exploring it and assessing his options, he discovered a Banished transport that had also crashed on the fragment, and the only survivor being the same Bloodstar brute he had previously seen, referred to as Gorian. In an attempt to escape, the pair entered an uneasy truce to dig out a buried sentinel and reprogram it to fly back to the main fragment. December 25th, 2559. With their initial attempt successful, the pair began their trip back to the main fragment. Unfortunately for Horvath, Gorian decided to betray him before the sentinel had even completed the journey, presumably because brutes as a species didn't understand the significance of Christmas. The fight continued as the pair crashed back onto the main set of fragments, with the brute running yet choosing to spare the Spartan, although he was left in a state of unconsciousness as his Majolno armour set about keeping him alive, and he wasn't back on his feet for several days. Other human squads would also find themselves scattered across smaller fragments of Zeta Halo, such as a small group of Marines that found themselves on a piece of the ring that consisted of a canyon as its centrepiece, where they were repeatedly attacked by Banished raiding parties and the installation's sentinel defences while attempting to establish contact with friendly forces. December 28th, 2559. While reconning part of the ring fragment, Spartan Sorel made note of the fact that the ring was slowly beginning a process of repair, even without manual input from the monitor. These repairs were also noted by the Banished, who made note of them as inconveniences. Over the first month and a half of the battle, marine missions on the Halo ring were mainly limited to reconnaissance in order to allow time for the non-combatant survivors to be trained. January 8th, 2560. At this point, Horvath was back on his feet and making his way aimlessly across the fragments in search of other survivors. Passing through the area where the Banished had re-established their AA turrets, he made note of the fact that they were actively being used, theorising that there were still human ships in space. However, it is more likely that at this point they were being used against sentinel defences such as retriever sentinels. January 20th, 2560. Spartan Stone and Kovan scouted out the Banished red zone and discovered that the faction structure in the aftermath of Aatrox's disappearance had only made its competitive nature even more unstable, with Escharum being the focal point that held the Banished forces present at Zeta Halo united, as he had done during Aatrox's time on the Ark. January 23rd, 2560. After reaching the conclusion that the only hope humanity had against the Banished would be to create a power vacuum, Spartan Griffin led 3 other Spartans, Panago, Malik, and Sarkar, to the House of Reckoning, leaving Spartan Vettel of his fire team in charge of Spartan forces still at the ship. However, some of the Spartans forced to stay behind had doubts about the team chosen, with Makovich believing that it was reckless to choose the Spartans for such a crucial task through drawing straws, while Spartan Vettel believed that Griffin's place was as a leader at the ship. However, his mind would not be swayed, and with the other Spartans providing overwatch from the surrounding mountains, Griffin's team worked their way to the House of Reckoning over the course of the following days. January 30th, 2560. Shortly after arriving at the Banished base, the Spartans somehow got separated, likely through ambush tactics, with Griffin being the only one to face Escharum personally. In the following encounter, he barely managed to escape and send out a warning to his fellow Spartans before being captured, informing them that Escharum had ordered a devastating counter-attack against the ship. Despite being forewarned of the upcoming attack, the Spartans left in charge chose to hold the base that they had established, knowing that if their forces were scattered, humanity would never be able to regain a foothold without a miracle. January 31st, 2560. Before the battle, Spartan Stone was sent with a small squad to recon the size of the Banished force, the largest scale movement that had been seen in the conflict up to that point. An unstoppable force that marched and hovered all across the fragment of the ring until it reached the ship at the end of that day. February 2nd, 2560. After a day and a half of fighting, humanity was finally overwhelmed by the Banished, with hundreds of forces pouring into the valley that led up to the ship by the time the remaining Spartans ordered the retreat. Of the Spartans present at the Reverie battle, only 8 of them were known to have escaped, while non-Spartan casualties were much higher. Unfortunately, many of the human forces had already been cornered between the Banished and the bottomless pits of the ring fractures. Spartan Stone and Kovan oversaw the retreat of the boat crew, initially saving them from an elite as the 2 medics among them tried to pull a severely injured Spartan out of the combat zone, but was forced to leave one of their own behind when he was severely injured by another elite with an energy sword. At one point, the various forms of damage Kovan's armour had sustained over the course of the conflict hit a temporary breaking point. Part of it completely froze up and left her and the others defenceless. In response, Browning burst out of the cover of the cave they were hiding in to try and draw away the nearby Banished forces. Despite the distraction being enough, he was unable to get far himself, frantically stealing a ghost and inadvertently crashing it before being cornered, where he was thrown in a Banished war skiff and transported to the redoubt of Sundering. Once her armour recovered, Kovan attempted to find Browning, but merely discovered evidence of the fight and then spent most of the following day assessing the battlefield and scavenging what she could for her group. However, the Banished had prioritised removing many fallen Spartans from the area to prevent survivors from salvaging any armour parts, so she was unable to repair the damages to her armour. In the hours afterwards, any survivors were forced to flee across the valleys or into the mountains with no coordination, with many being overwhelmed and captured by Banished forces. From here, they were forced to split up and go on the run from the Banished, usually alongside whoever they were with during the retreat. Some of these groups seemingly took on the names of squads already on the Infinity, while others had unique nicknames. February 3rd, 2560. Captured during the battle, Spartan Hedge of Fireteam Lancer was shipped to the House of Reckoning, where he and a handful of other survivors, 2 humans and an elite, were forced to fight onslaughts of Banished troops in an almost ritualistic recreation of the types of scenarios Atriox was thrown against by the Covenant. Referred to as the Trials of Atriox, this fate was something that many human prisoners would be forced through over the next several months, and that, according to Escharum, none would survive until the Master Chief's reawakening. With this crushing victory, the Banished expanded their control and began hunting the scattered leftovers. The site referred to as the Horn of Abolition was set up to track human signals, making it easy for the Banished to prevent any attempts by the Spartans to re-establish their presence. Although a pair of Marines attempted to damage one of the communication arrays, the Banished later found a Forerunner device that would expand their base's abilities, leaving humanity with nowhere to hide on the fragments. Knowing that they posed the biggest threat, Escharum prioritised Banished efforts on eliminating the last of the Spartans, dedicating the Hand of Atriox, Blood Stars, and even regular brute snipers to the hunt. Over the course of the next month, they also took control of any human forward operating base platforms that were left active. After securing the site of the battle, the Banished turned it into a base of their own, Outpost Tremonius, named after one of the brutes that had led the Banished in the battle. Previously unknown to the humans, the Banished discovered that the ship had crashed above an area of the ring's surface that covered a Forerunner facility which housed many of the Silex devices that had been key to the Forerunner conservation measure. The faction discovered the facility beneath and, during their explorations, found a Silex different in form to the others, one that held a final dark secret of the Forerunners. Alongside the Silex itself, Banished researchers uncovered records of the Forerunners' initial discovery of the Endless. Initially, several of the Spartans focused on searching for any survivors from the battle, but decided that staying mostly separated was the best course of action. Along with this, Spartans Sorel and Makovich discovered a base platform that had not been able to fully deploy at the beginning of the battle, and used its communication systems to set up a method of passing updates between surviving Spartans. However, they were forced to use it sparingly to limit the risk of it being discovered and either tracked or destroyed by the Banished. March 3rd, 2560. A month after the fall of the Reverie, Spartans Makovich, Vettel and Sorel regrouped and reached the conclusion that their only objective needed to be to stop the Banished from taking control of Zeta Halo. To do this, they initiated the Rubicon Protocol before going their separate ways. Simultaneously, Spartan Kovan's group arrived at one of the base platforms to scavenge supplies, where they received the transmission of the command. At an unknown point in this time frame, a pair of Spartans, Jade and Rosado, scouted out the Banished research base Annex Ridge, which had been set up early on in the Banished presence on the ring, before taking over a Banished ship, transporting ring artifacts, and travelling to an unknown area of Zeta Halo. March 4th, 2560. Unaware of the initiation of the Rubicon Protocol, Orvath encountered a severely wounded asset recovery agent that had been part of the human presence on Zeta Halo prior to the creators' attempt to claim it. Due to information she held, she had been captured and left for dead by the Banished, and was barely able to tell him about a location that they had been searching for, which gave him a renewed objective and purpose, one that would take weeks or months to complete. April 18th, 2560. Due to having no luck with bypassing the measures taken to keep the Silex sealed, Escharum had Lucas Browning brought to the outpost and used him to open the Silex and free the being inside, referred to only as the Harbinger. Despite her declaration that everything they knew would be undone, Escharum still established an alliance with her. However, her attention quickly snapped to Browning, who would then be kept at the site for several days, likely at her request, while she and Escharum established terms. Having witnessed large-scale movements heading in the direction of Outpost Tremonius, Kovan's group chose to investigate the site, with Kovan herself encountering Stone on the way. Caught up on their respective situations, the pair of Spartans moved to scout out the crash site and outpost Tremonius. April 23rd, 2560. Initially, Stone did a recon sweep of the site and sent a report on it and another excavation site to Spartans Makovich and Sorel. In their second run, they made an attempt to rescue Browning, only to find him bound by unrecognisable technology, which forced Kovan to abandon him, with just the small comfort that those he had tried to save had survived. Afterwards, Stone and Kovan were forced to split up again, with Kovan returning to the rest of the boat crew, while Stone entered the outpost and began scouting out the Forerunners' facility beneath it. Initially returned to the tower, Browning would start to be moved to the House of Reckoning on a regular basis, where the Harbinger would speak to him regarding secrets of the Forerunner era. With the true extent of his mental damage unknown, these conversations would gradually drive him insane. Elsewhere on the wing, Vettel ambushed a Banished patrol in search of information regarding surviving prisoners, specifically Griffin's location. April 24th, 2560. Acting on Stone's intel, Makovich and Sorel discovered the Banished excavation site and reached the conclusion that they were hunting for the Monitor. Thus, they moved to both monitoring and sabotaging the site, until it reached the target the Banished were after. At an unknown point, the Harbinger also modified the equipment being used at the main Banished excavation site to make it more efficient at burning through Forerunner materials and other aspects of the Halo Ring substructures. April 26th, 2560. While searching for another way back to the surface and tracking a then unknown inhuman signal, Spartan Stone encountered a group of new aliens referred to as Skimmers, and witnessed Gorian, along with a Silent Shadow elite, Jaeger Adomni, access a set of Forerunner data. Although she was able to claim this data, it was short-lived as she had to fight her way through a Banished unit, which gave Jaeger a chance to use his active camouflage to ambush her in an attack she could not have predicted and retake the data node. Unknown to any of the Banished survivors of the skirmish, Stone had gotten just enough time for her armor's AI to copy over the data and corrupt the original, thus making what Jaeger would later hand over to Esherum useless. April 27th, 2560. After being called out on her closed-off nature, Kovan and the boat's crew made their way into the site beneath the reverie in pursuit of Stone. However, all they were able to find was Stone's remains and the copy of the data that she had made. While descending further into the ring's substructures, the group was discovered by one of the installation's sub-monitors, Adjutant Veridity, who proceeded to lead them to the site known as the Conservatory. April 29th, 2560. After discovering that Griffin was being held in the tower, Spartan Vettel set out to rescue him. Outlining his plan on an open transmission, he was never heard from again after this by other survivors, and Griffin remained interlocked in the tower. May 3rd, 2560. After almost a month of searching, Horvath eventually found the site he was looking for. Descending into the facility, he eventually picked up human life signs, which turned out to be the boat crew being led to the conservatory by a Veridity. May 9th, 2560. Arriving at the centre of the conservatory, the boat crew freed Pyre from the stasis that she had been trapped in by Cortana. Although still refusing to actively oppose the Banished, Pyre allowed the humans to access a nearby beacon tower to send the ring's coordinates as a signal for reinforcements. May 14th, 2560. After another 5 days in the conservatory, the boat crew discovered the teleportation pad that would take them to the beacon tower. The following battle drew the attention of Jaeger and Gorian, but the Spartans were able to achieve their objective, only at great cost. Aside from Kovan herself, only 2 of her original team survived the fight. Meanwhile, Horvath was teleported to parts unknown on the ring after being trapped on an active teleportation platform and sent away moments before it was destroyed. May 15th, 2560. With the Banished gaining a way into the conservatory, the Spartans Makovich and Sorel moved in to follow them. Upon entering, the Spartans were ambushed by Jaeger Adomni, who almost immediately injured Sorel. Makovich chose to cover her fellow Spartan as he journeyed further into the facility in search of the Monitor, only to fall to the Silent Shadow's energy sword in a brief fight. However, Sorel was also unsuccessful and eventually found himself cornered by Hyperius and Tavares of the Hand of Atriox. Despite the survival of a handful of others, the Brutes were under the impression that Sorel was the last Spartan present on Zeta Halo. May 25th, 2560. Spartan Horvath found himself on a snow-covered mountainside near a Forerunner facility, far from the area of destruction, with the only signs of life being the convoys of banished ships he later spotted. After working his way down the mountain over the course of several days and scavenging what he could from a crashed escape pod, he sent out one of many open-ended transmissions in hopes of contacting other human survivors, this time adding a call appealing to the Master Chief directly. May 28th, 2560. After almost half a year drifting in space, the Master Chief was found and awakened by a survivor of the initial battle above the Halo Ring, Fernando Esparza. With little time to be caught up to speed on the situation, Chief quickly set about attempts to link back up with other human forces, starting by boarding a banished dreadnought, the Ghost of Grabrakan, that had disabled the Pelican. Fighting his way to the bridge, he discovered that the only way to deactivate the stasis beam in time was to destroy the entire ship, which caught the attention of Escharum, who was pleased to see the return and survival of the Master Chief. With the dreadnought destroyed, Chief turned his attention to the fate of the Infinity, only to discover the scale of the defeat. The ship itself was nowhere to be seen, and nothing of the overall battle group was left other than debris floating in space. Within the main territory of the Banished, news of the Master Chief's return was met with mixed reactions, as although Escharum and many fearless or foolhardy warriors were eager to fight him in person, others such as Tremonius felt concerned at what his return could mean for the Banished. Back on the Pelican, Master Chief moved to making his way to the ring itself to retrieve the weapon that had contained Cortana, landing on the ring through one of the damaged areas of the substructure and working his way to the signal's origin point. While trying to work their way back to the surface, the Master Chief and the weapon found Spartan Stone's remains and recovered an enhanced shielding unit from her armour, shortly before being confronted by Tremonius, only to defeat him and his Jackal Guards in a brief fight. Following this, Chief retook the outpost and ship ruins, while the weapon removed it from the Banished network to create a safe landing point for the Pelican. Shortly after, a distress signal was detected south of their position, and the Spartan immediately insisted on preparing a rescue attempt, much to the pilot's dismay. They were forced to divert for a safer place to deploy, proceeding to retake one of the forward operating base platforms present on the ring fragment close to the source of the distress call, discovering that recapturing them allowed them to reveal points of interest, banished operatives and outposts, surviving human squads, and salvageable Spartan equipment. Once they located the imprisoned Spartan, they were forced to fight Chaklock before freeing him. With his last words, Griffin informed him of the main Banished excavation site, knowledge which he had likely heard of from Lucas Browning, and asked him to find any of the remaining Spartans. As he crossed the fragments to find the site, the Chief fought his way through any Banished strongholds he encountered, both to hinder the faction and to give any survivors more breathing room, until he could focus his efforts on directly aiding them. Although unknown if Master Chief and the weapon encountered them or were even aware of their presence, there was already a squad of humans scouting out the site he was looking for. Initially appearing abandoned, the energy beam used to carve out the tunnel entrance was activated to act as a makeshift energy shield as he approached. While attempting to deactivate the controls to the excavation equipment, he was ambushed by and defeated Bassus, the brute chieftain in charge of the site. Once the entry point was reopened, the Chief and the weapon moved to enter the conservatory. Working their way through the site, they discovered Despondent Pyre as she was attacked by a group of skimmers. However, they were too late to prevent her destruction at the hands of the Harbinger, and all they could do was find a way back to the surface yet again after their own encounter with the skimmers. Despite being able to rather effortlessly knock down Chief and even temporarily disable his armour with her abilities, the Harbinger teleported to parts unknown after enabling the reformation process, likely to a nearby Banished outpost. Concurrently, the first of the Ring's reformation spies activated close by, with a nearby Banished patrol being deployed or redirected to defend it from the Master Chief when he investigated the new location. The spire itself presented a different challenge. Its sub-monitor, and seemingly the one designated as Despondent Pyre's successor, Adjutant Resolution, moved to stop them from shutting down the process, and would later turn the Sentinels against Master Chief and humanity after its first combat unit was destroyed. Once the spire was successfully deactivated, Chief was forced to make a rushed exit by leaping from it and landing in the troop bay of the Pelican, and prepared to set out towards the command spire site. Roughly 6 hours into the Master Chief's one Spartan war against the Banished, the Pelican was shot down by a set of Banished turret emplacements that dominated the smallest of the main fragments. As he set out to destroy each one, Escharum contacted him through the holoprojectors of the first and second turrets. Along with this, he ordered the deployment of the Hand of Atriox to the fragments once the first was destroyed. Due to Jaeger's pre-existing orders to silently follow the Master Chief's movements, only Hyperius and Tavorus were sent to the site, with one of them taunting the Spartan over his comms after the destruction of the second turret. Seeking to cut the Spartan off from his Pelican, they waited until the last turret was destroyed and landed in the centre of the frigate ruins that were scattered across the flatland area of the fragment, with Hyperius lying in wait in his customised chopper, and Tavorus deploying in the Banished drop pod from the dreadnought holding position above the area. However, despite their abilities, they could not defeat the Master Chief. Watching over the aftermath of this skirmish, the alliance between Escharum and the Harbinger began to become as fractured as the ring's surface. Arguing over the best course of action to stop the Chief, and Escharum reluctantly deploying a larger force to the area surrounding the command spire to protect it, as the Harbinger directed the reconstruction efforts to focus around the silent auditorium. With the turrets along with Hyperius and Tavorus dealt with, the trio arrived at the command spire, only to find it locked down with an unknown forerunner sequence. However, the weapon was able to reconstruct it using data from several nearby forerunner beacon towers. En route to the closest beacon tower, Master Chief gathered a group of human survivors in a razorback and set out to retake Fob November as witnessed by the Bloodstar Jackal Baroth, who chose to fall back in the hopes of gaining the honour and glory of victory over the Spartan. However, despite the Kikyar's capabilities, he was no Halo 2 Jackal sniper and was quickly dealt with. In order to reach the other beacon towers, the Master Chief was forced to fight his way through and shut down Oven Gate, which severely hindered Banished attempts to control the movements of their enemy. Continuing on, he retook another two base platforms, fought the Bloodstar Hunter pair Myriad, and levelled Danix Ridge. Once they had all the data they needed, they returned to the newly reinforced command spire and accessed it. Within the command spire, the weapon successfully lured the Harbinger into a trap to retrieve the Despondent Pyre's Encephalon. However, along with the weapon almost being deleted by the Chief, the retrieval would prove to be partially pointless as the Encephalon had already been used to unlock most of the relevant systems. Once the command spire was deactivated, the pilot moved to pick Chief up, but Jaeger finally made his move. Deactivating his active camouflage, he revealed himself inside the Pelican and caused it to crash somewhere on the Banished fragment before taking the pilot to the House of Reckoning as a prisoner. In response, Chief ordered the weapon to generate a portal within the wing's slip-space teleportation network to a location near the projected crash site. Passing through a data cluster in the process, the pair found themselves in a forerunner facility. While attempting to work out their location, they were contacted by Escharum yet again, who showed them that he had imprisoned the pilot in an identical device to that Spartan Griffin had been trapped in, as an attempt to lure in the Chief. On their way, they witnessed the reformation process focused around the silent auditorium. Finding a gravity lift that they hoped would lead them to the exit, they found a recording of Cortana ordering the destruction of Doizak in response to Atriox's defiance of the Created. This, combined with witnessing other data recordings of Cortana's actions, gave the weapon the realization that she was a copy of Cortana. However, after his trust in her had been renewed, the Chief refused to delete the weapon, and the pair continued to find a way to the pilot. Once he found a way out of the site, Chief found himself a short distance from the House of Reckoning, needing to fight his way through multiple Banished perimeter positions to get there. The first of which held a few human prisoners, along with some salvaged vehicles and other pieces of equipment, which made his job easier. Inside the base, he was forced to fight through various waves of Banished forces in the rooms where prisoners had faced the trials of Atriox before Escharum would eventually allow him to proceed. Eventually, he fought both Jaeger and Escharum personally, with each being two of the toughest opponents he had ever faced, with Jaeger's active camo combined with the darkness of the arena forcing him to remain on high alert for the entire fight, whereas Escharum had tied an energy shield to the systems or to the device holding the pilot. However, he overpowered both of them and chose to show a warrior's respect to Escharum in the Brute's final moments. With Escherum's fall, multiple squads were ordered to redeploy to the Silent Auditorium, as it was the next most likely target for the Master Chief. Likely due to this reprioritisation by the Banished, various surviving human squads began to mobilise to see what could be gathered from the remains of bases that the Master Chief had fought through. At various points within the Forerunner's site, Chief and the weapon witnessed multiple data holograms of Cortana's final moments, mainly her verbal confrontations with Atriox, culminating in her frantic planning and final sacrifice to stop Atriox. As they continued through the Silent Auditorium, they encountered Adjutant Resolution yet again, this time stating that he had switched sides after discovering why the Harbinger and the Banished were so eager to repair Zeta Halo. Based in the chamber where her species had been imprisoned and judged, the Harbinger and her Banished guards were confronted by the Master Chief as she attempted to find the location of the Endless's Silexes and to transmit the coordinates elsewhere. Although the objectives were achieved, despite the remote intervention of an unknown being, not even the presence of the super-aggressive brute chieftain Horiatus could stop the demon. All that the Harbinger could do once her injuries had become fatal was cryptically speak to the other being on the receiving end of her communication, and ominously threaten her opponents of the impending return of the Endless. After a brief goodbye with Cortana, the Master Chief and weapon were forced to jump through a randomly generated portal as the Silent Auditorium collapsed around them. May 31st, 2560. Estimated. The portal that the Chief leapt through transported them to a desert on the opposite side of Zeta Halo. Although seemingly instantaneous from their perspective, 3 days had passed while they had travelled through the portal, either through time dilation or memory loss. However, they were not stuck in the desert for long, as Esparza found their IFF tag and returned them to the main group of human survivors, regrouping at the Mortal Reverie and ready to take the fight to the Banished. Although many important Banished targets on the ring fragments were taken out by the Chief, either during his campaign against Escharum or in the aftermath of it, the Banished as a whole still dominated the Halo ring. Even the victories scored by Master Chief and his allies were not as decisive as they had hoped for. Elsewhere on Zeta Halo, Atriox arrived at the Forerunner facility that held the Endless's Silexes and activated them before returning to the Banished, preventing the power vacuum that the Spartans had previously thought would occur in the absence of Escharum, and granting his followers with the same resolve and purpose that the Master Chief's return had done for Escharum. Where things go from here is anyone's guess until Edge of Dawn releases. There is more I could have added, such as the accounts of each open world encounter or the Outpost Intel audio logs, but the optional nature of the former doesn't lend itself well to this sort of video, and the dates of the latter are usually left vague. It is possible to work out some of them, but you do need to read between the lines. Therefore, for those categories, I decided it would be best to leave it to events or characters that had been referenced in other sources, regardless of how small scale. Also, for the parts referencing Baroth, I just saw the opportunity for a joke and stuck with it. I hope you enjoyed, and thanks for watching.